This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg, here in South Africa. I'm Eben Jansen. The show is live. It's broadcast from our studios in Auckland Park. We're also streaming live on YouTube right now, with our whole show available on our YouTube channel on demand. Today, a dramatic rise in the number of Ebola deaths has been reported in countries affected in West Africa. Then we look at the plight of sex workers here in South Africa. The Reed Dance takes place in KwaZulu-Natal at the weekend. And finally, we'll speak to Zalda Lechranchi, Nelson Mandela's former personal assistant and author of the book, Good Morning, Mr. Mandela. But first, Katrin gives us the news.
Well, hello and welcome to Newsroom. I'm Katrin Malan, and let's take a look at the top stories this morning. A two-day meeting convened by the World Health Organization to discuss potential treatments for Ebola begins in Geneva today. It will discuss the most promising drugs and how to fast-track their testing and production. But the medical charity Doctors Without Borders warns that the meeting will have little impact. The number of Ebola patients who have died of the disease has surged over the last few days. More than 1,900 people have now died in the Ebola epidemic sweeping through West Africa. Democratic Alliance leader Helen Zille will be in Pretoria today for the deadline of the handing over of the so-called spy tapes. Last week, the Supreme Court of Appeal ruled that the National Prosecuting Authority had to comply with a previous order to release the tapes. The recordings were cited as a reason to drop fraud and corruption charges against President Jacob Zuma shortly before he was sworn in as president in 2009. The Post Office says customers should expect further delays in the delivery of mail in Gauteng due to an ongoing strike. This while part-time employees have again embarked on an illegal strike demanding salary increases. The Post Office has been hit by a series of strikes since the beginning of this year. The continuous industrial actions have resulted in a loss of revenue of up to 71 million rand so far this year. Lesotho coalition parties are expected to address Basotho after holding talks in Maseru to end settlement in the Mountain Kingdom yesterday. The talks were ordered by SADC following a two-day meeting held in Pretoria. The All Basotho Convention, Lesotho Congress for Democracy and Basotho National Party say they are confident that the talks will bring peace. Lesotho Prime Minister Tom Tabane returned to the country yesterday and says he has appointed a new army chief. Lesotho's Commissioner of Police, Kgotatso Tsuwana, who has also returned to the country, has called on all police officers to report back to duty.
Decisions were made by Troika in Pretoria. The chairman of Troika, President Zuma, was there, and other relevant participants, so they made the decision.
Then in international news, a crucial NATO summit meeting gets underway in Wales today. More than 60 world leaders have arrived for the summit and are expected to face a number of serious threats. The two-day summit will be dominated by the crisis in the Ukraine and the threat posed by the Islamic State militants in Iraq and Syria. Now remember, as always, all of these top stories are available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Eben, over to you.
Thank you very much, Katrin. There has been a dramatic surge in Ebola deaths in West Africa in recent days. More than 1,900 people are now reported to have succumbed to the deadly disease. The Ebola epidemic is sweeping through West Africa, with the World Health Organization confirming more than 3,500 cases in Guinea, Sierra Leone and Liberia. The latest toll represents a significant increase from the 1,552 deaths and just over 3,000 cases reported by the Geneva-based organization at the start of this week. We asked the question, why is the disease seemingly spiraling out of control? And more on the show today. But before we introduce our guests, let's take a look at a video that went viral this week after the dramatic escape of an Ebola patient in Liberia.
The man in the red shirt has Ebola and has just escaped quarantine in Monrovia. He's searching for food and armed with a stick, trying to avoid the medical staff who are pursuing him. He's just escaped Monrovia's Elwa Hospital, which is overcrowded and struggling to provide Ebola patients with food and water. Locals are both sympathetic and frustrated.
Commander, we told from the beginning we don't want no Ebola champion. Today, make it fat. Ebola patient coming out all the time, family, quality.
After a tense standoff, the man is surrounded by medical personnel and is eventually bundled into an ambulance. Liberia has the highest Ebola infection rate in this latest outbreak, with around 700 deaths out of more than 1,300 suspected and confirmed cases.
We have a panel of experts who will be talking about different issues surrounding Ebola today. But before we introduce them, let's talk to Francis Kennedy, the World Food Programme spokesperson, who's on the line from Monrovia in Liberia to give us the latest. Good morning, Francis.
Good morning to you.
Francis, just paint a picture for us. The situation on the ground, please.
I'm in Monrovia in the capital, and I've been also out to the north of the capital to see some of the quarantined areas. These are zones where people are not allowed to move in or move out because there has been some form of Ebola outbreak within the area. One of them, Dolo Town, has about 18,000 people there. These people are unable to get out to get food, so the World Food Programme is there bringing in supplies. Also in Monrovia itself, in West Point, which is a sort of shanty town area on the outskirts of the capital, we've been providing food there. The situation is really tense in many cases because people are concerned. They are worried about, when they're in quarantined areas, how long they're going to be that way, how they're going to be able to keep doing their jobs, get out, get food for themselves. We're very much scaling up at the moment because we are in the capital, but further to the north, there are growing numbers of communities that are affected, which are having restrictions put on them, and we're trying to reach them and provide them with food. If you think at the moment we've fed in Liberia, provided food for around 40,000 people in the affected communities, but that is going to be scaling up significantly. And we're doing the same in the other two countries, in Guinea and also in Sierra Leone. This is the immediate challenge. We're in an emergency. It's a health emergency. So we need to identify, while people are not able to move, while markets aren't functioning, how to act right now. There are also longer-term considerations about the whole food security. We're concerned about the peak of the crop harvesting of cereals, which is in a few weeks' time. The area in the north of Liberia, where it was one of the most productive areas of the country, is also very much the epicenter. Shortage of labour, people not in the fields, people not able to get that food. How does it get to the market? Traders are fearful. There are restrictions on movement. And all of that means that we're likely to see an impact from the food getting from the farm to the market in town, with an obvious impact on food prices.
Just tell us, the accusations of Ebola patients not being fed and not being given water while in quarantine centres. Have you come across this? Is this really the case?
The situation in Monrovia is that, unfortunately, there is a huge shortage of proper treatment centres for the people who are suffering. We have situations where the people who are suspected cases are having to be put in with people who are more or less confirmed. The World Food Programme is providing food to the health authorities here to feed those, provide for the people in the centres. People who are at for example, I visited the Médecins Sans Frontières Centre here, which is probably the most well set up one in Monrovia. There, for people who are in the extreme throes of this disease, they have a very special dietary requirements. They're going to be trying to give them liquids and fruit juices and we are providing more for the wider population. We're providing some for treatment centres, but the situation is just growing numbers of people, people who are concerned they have the disease, and the health system and the health authorities struggling to cope with those people and knowing where they should go, how they should be treated.
Well, thank you very much for joining us and giving us an insight what is happening on the ground in Liberia, Guinea and Sierra Leone, of course. That is Francis Kennedy, the World Food Programme spokesperson, who joined us on the line from Monrovia in Liberia. Now, today, we also joined in our Pretoria studio by Dr. Tobias Tagavarasha from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, who talks to us about the Ebola epidemic that has put harvests at risk and sent food prices soaring in West Africa. And from the South African Institute of International Affairs, we're joined by research associate Dr. Azwimpeleli Langalanga, who talks to us about the legal and security matters concerning the disease and on whether people should be arrested for not disclosing that they are infected with Ebola, after we recently saw the arrest of 39 immigrants in Nigeria. If I can go to Dr. Tobias, we've just heard from the World Food Programme, Dr. Tobias. We've just heard, just explain to us how Ebola holds a threat to food security in West Africa.
I wish to thank you, Eben, for giving me this opportunity to highlight the downstream effects of the Ebola viral disease on food security and nutrition. As you know, those countries depend on the direct food production for their food security. With the outbreak of the disease, it means many people are not able to go into their fields to harvest the crop that is ready for harvesting, in particular rice, maize, and cocoa, because of restricted movement. We are also aware that there's an effect on labor. There will be insufficient labor available to harvest. That will lead into shortage of food for immediate consumption. There may be cases of panic buying from the market, which has a direct effect on increasing prices. We are also aware that most people derive their food from cross-border trade from the informal sector. Due to movement restrictions, it means the food that is there cannot reach the market easily, and therefore there will be food shortages, which will lead into high food prices. So those are the direct, immediate effects that are arising from the Ebola virus disease. There is going to be long-term and medium-term effects if farmers and households are not able to get into their fields where they need to plant the crops now for harvest 4 months later. It means the food security impacts are going to be longer and much more traumatic than might appear at face value. So efforts are being made by the FAO, working in conjunction with other UN agencies, to make rapid assessments of the food security situation and nutrition, and in particular the impact on food prices and availability of food. We are happy that there is concerted effort and focus by the international community on moving just beyond the emergency relief operations to combat the effects of the disease, but to assist the 4 affected countries to recover in terms of agricultural production and making that there is enough food to continue with sustainable livelihoods.
I want to ask you, Dr. Kennedy, if you can sketch the seriousness of food shortages right now, and also tell us, does this mean there's a threat then on people going into the forests and taking animals in the like chimpanzees, bushmeat, and so forth? We know there are restrictions on this kind of hunting, but do you think this is a legitimate threat then?
That could be a threat if relief operations do not come in. But I'm pleased to say that, as reported by Francis from the World Food Programme, that measures are being put in place to assist and improve the availability of food to prevent situations where people might put their lives at danger, at risk again, by eating food that will make them vulnerable to further infections. So we are emphasizing the need to ensure that assistance is made available in making food available, in supporting the farmers where they can use other means to harvest the food that is available, where there will be easier transport for traders to bring food into the country. All those coordinated efforts are needed to prevent what you have rightly pointed out, the threats and the danger of people wanting to use wildlife origin food to sustain their lives. But rather let us support them to make the food available to the best possible that we can.
Dr. Tobias Tagavarasha, thank you very much for joining us. This situation seems very dire, from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, giving us an insight as to how dire the situation with food security is in West Africa, especially those affected countries. With me in studio, Mr. Azwimpileli Langalanga from the South African Institute of International Affairs. A further threat. Can you talk to us about this case in Nigeria where we saw 39 immigrants arrested? What happens when people don't disclose that they have this disease? Or what should happen?
Generally, when we look at Ebola and the way it is so infectious and can be easily transmitted from one person to the other, from a legal perspective, what should happen is that if someone has Ebola, then it should be those who know that the person has Ebola, they have a legal right or duty to report the fact that there is an Ebola patient. Especially looking at the West African context, the fact that culturally they have been hiding people with Ebola, and this is one of the reasons that the disease has been spreading so fast. And the fact that their economies are mostly informal, so there's a lot of movement of people from one area to the other. So there should be legal restrictions in terms of movement of people. And
how do you manage this and how do you implement it in these countries where borders are often quite porous?
Yeah, that has been the challenge in West Africa in terms of restriction of movement of people. But they have been trying to mount a lot of roadblocks in roads to try to intercept any people who could be with the virus or who could be moving from one country to the other, even though their resources are quite limited.
We watched a video a little bit earlier about an escaped patient who escaped from a centre. What are the rights of the individual in that case? A person who is in a quarantine centre but who claims that he's hungry, he's not being fed, he's not giving enough water and runs away from this. How does that play up? Here we see the picture of this man who escaped and who ran to the market because he was hungry.
Yeah, I mean, that is a tricky one. But from legally, the patient with Ebola is, their rights to movement are restricted and they should remain restricted. But then they have also a right to food. So we have a situation where the health authorities themselves should be making sure that the Ebola patients are fed. But they have no right to movement. They should be restricted. They should be quarantined.
What about South Africa? We've seen South Africa have now announced we've got quarantine centres, 11 hospitals that are being equipped as quarantine centres. Yes. Should we be taking any other drastic steps in this scenario?
No, I think so far I think we've done enough measures contingency measures in case we have such a case. I think the quarantine centres they are the best way to address the disease. Provided will provide them with the other rights like the right to food. So I think for now we are fine.
That is the good news. We hope that we are okay for now, but more action needs to be taken in West Africa to deal with it as a disease. Nearly 400 more extra deaths have been reported. Thank you, Mr. Azwimpileli Langalanga from the South African Institute of International Affairs, giving us a legal picture. What are the rights of the individual in this case? It seems the lines are very blurred and almost as blurred as the as the borders are porous in that part of the world. Here are some of your comments. Laurie Garrett says, nearly 300 health workers in Ebola epidemic have gotten the virus, but zero work for Médecins Sans Frontières, that is Doctors Without Borders. Shouldn't we pay attention to what they are doing right? That is a very, very good question you're asking. This one from the Department of Health here in South Africa at Health ZA says, Ebola SA, avoid if you can travels to Liberia, Guinea and Sierra Leone, where it is known that a number of people have died of Ebola. Really? Department of Health? A number of people, 2,000 people have lost their lives, and that number is expected to go up into the tens of thousands, they say, if we don't come up with a response. Conscious Compass says, avoid funeral or burial rituals that require handling the body of someone who has died from Ebola. Of course, it is not an airborne disease. The question marks remain. Why do people get infected, it seems, so easily if this is not an airborne disease? It is a question that we'll continue to ask on the show in the weeks and months to come. People are continuing to die. More than 1,900 have now lost their lives. That is more than 25% up than the reports we heard on Monday. You are watching Newsroom on SABC News. We'll be back after a short break.
Go on. Go explore. Go with the waves. Lead the brave. Go bold. Go strong. Drive. Dare. Go everywhere. To oceans where no one's gone.
Welcome back. This is Newsroom on SABC News. The KwaZulu-Natal Department of Arts and Culture says everything is in place for the 2014 Reed Dance starting tomorrow until Sunday at Nyokeni Palace in Nongoma in the north of the province. More than 50,000 maidens are expected to present their reeds before the monarch, King Goodwill Zwelithini. This year marks the 30th anniversary of the Reed Dance since its revival in 1984 of the old Zulu culture and tradition by His Majesty. Now, the KwaZulu-Natal Arts and Culture MEC, Ntombi Kaise Sibida Sapeta, joins us in our Durban studio to talk about safety measures that are in place to ensure safe transportation of these maidens. Good morning, ma'am. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, Eben, and your viewers at home.
Ma'am, just give us the latest preparations as we move into this weekend's Reed Dance festivities.
Eben, it's all systems go for this year's annual Reed ceremony that is taking place, as you said, in KwaNongoma, in Nyokeni Palace. We have put up adequate infrastructure for over 40,000 maidens that will be attending the Reed ceremony this year. And we have security plans in place and the activities that will be going on from today until Sunday. I can confidently say that we are ready as KwaZulu-Natal to host over 40,000 young maidens that will be coming from all the regions in the province, and we're expecting a number of maidens that will be coming from other provinces like Eastern Cape, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, Gauteng and Swaziland.
Now, ma'am, we had a horrific accident last year where where quite a few maidens lost their lives after the festivities. And I understand that you'll be remembering those maidens going into this weekend's festivities. Just tell us, what are you doing and what are we thinking?
Yes, Eben, we had that unfortunate incident last year, and this year we're leaving nothing to chance to ensure that our maidens are safe from their homes to Enyokeni and back from Enyokeni to their homes. We also have a plan in place to ensure that whilst they are in Enyokeni, they are safe in the area. We are working with all our law enforcing agencies in the province. SABC is involved, and Road Traffic Department is also involved. Part of that plan, Eben, is to ensure that the buses that will be ferrying the maidens to Enyokeni are road-worthy, and the drivers are in good condition to drive our maidens to Enyokeni. So we do have a plan, and we hope that all those that will be participating in ensuring that our young girls are safe will do their work. We have deployed road traffic inspectors in all strategic areas in the province, at the entrances and exits of the towns that these young girls will be coming from.
I also understand that you'll be erecting a memorial stone for these young women who lost their lives. Is that true?
Yes, Umzumbe municipality, Eben, last week, 2 weeks back, they erected a memorial stone in Umzumbe where the 9 maidens and matrons who died last year came from. They erected a memorial wall that will serve as a reminder to all of us in KwaZulu-Natal that we once had this unfortunate incident, but also to say to other young people they can do it. These young girls braved all the pressures that were there in their communities. They were young, but they said they are not going to participate in antisocial behaviors. Therefore, they are going to live healthy lifestyles. And we are saying that wall must act as a memory and a reminder to all of us and an encouragement to our young people to say they can do it like those 9 maidens that died last year.
Well, thank you very much for joining us this morning and giving us a little insight, ma'am, as to the festivities that will be taking place when the Reed Dance takes place. That's the MEC for Arts and Culture in KwaZulu-Natal. That is Ntombi Kaise Sibidla Sapeta, who joined us live from Durban, giving us a little insight into the festivities that we can expect this weekend when the Reed Dance gets underway. It gets underway tomorrow, really, and will last until Sunday. If you're travelling there, be safe on the roads, please. Now, it's National Book Week, and we take time to honour the literary works that have entertained, informed and inspired us over the years. Today, we're joined by one of the most talked about authors of the year, Zelda Lechranchi, who published one of the most highly anticipated books of the year as well. Good morning, Mr. Mandela. Zelda Lechranchi served as Mr. Mandela's personal assistant and close companion for close to 20 years. She's here with us in studio. What a treat it is for us to have you with us here, Zelda. Thank you for coming through.
Thanks for having me.
There's so much been said about the book, and I'm sure that the sales are doing well and the like. But tell us, how do you start putting a work on such an icon together, someone like Nelson Mandela?
Well, that was one of the issues I had to consider. I never wanted to write about a book about Madiba. I don't think of myself as an academic or a person that can really add value to that depth and extent of when it deals with his life or the legacy of Nelson Mandela. So this was really my experiences, my interpretation and how things affected me. I started off by just downloading my memory in 2009 when I was realizing I was becoming old and forgetful too. So I didn't start off as if I wanted to write a book. It was just, downloading memory. And then last year in May, someone said, well, this is the good story. It's a story of love and hope and second chances. And this is the story you need to tell.
And the response to the book has been enormous. How has that affected you? And just tell us about some of the things that maybe we don't know about in that response.
I must be honest with you, Eben, I've been overwhelmed, and it is beyond anything I've expected ever of myself or of the impact of the book. I've had a young black man, 29 years of age, calling into a radio station saying he never understood white people, and for the first time after reading my book, now he understands white people. A young girl from Stellenbosch, 25-year-old white girl, she considers her parents racist. She wrote an email to me saying she read the book and now she knows how to approach her parents and how to try and change them. Yeah. Those are two responses I never expected of myself, to have an impact on people's lives like that. So it outweighs any negativity that there ever could have been or was about the book.
Well, there always is, I suppose, but that's part of the debate and part of the discourse. The good thing is that, or the thing that's come out is this thing in some debates in the media being called whiteness in contemporary society or white identity. I mean, you being the Buddha Macy in Madiba's life, as it were. Is this a debate that you expected or even maybe intended to arise in a way from the book?
I'm very happy that this book has unexpectedly landed in this space. And I think it's something I'm very happy if I was able to stimulate that kind of debate, because it's something we need to speak about it openly. But also I hope that people will take in dealing with exactly that issue, the racial issues. When people read my book, it will have an impact and it will give them information on how to deal with these issues.
We seem to be a country that's really battling continuously with racial polarization. Do we have agents in South Africa that further this agenda, and how do we address that as a nation?
Yeah, man, I've been told by people that they thought, some people think that I'm too honest in the book because I admit to being a racist at the age of 23. If you asked me at the age of 23, I would have denied it. Yeah. Now I'm able to admit it because I know and I realize the changes I've been through. But you know what? One of the most important things that Madiba taught me is it's easier to change others than it is to have to change yourself. And when we talk about agents and people dealing with this racial issue, I want people to first think of themselves. You know, we've become a nation. We are very quick to judge people, to pass judgment at people, to jump at one another. And what was Madiba all about for all of us? It was about respect, but it starts with self-respect.
And forgiving yourself in a way for, as you said, being a racist at 23. We all have made those kind of errors of judgment in our lives. And is that the way, is that one of the things that's holding us back as a nation a little bit?
I do think so, and I think the thing of honesty, there's things we don't talk about because it's so brutally honest, and you think you're going to offend people by being honest. But that's where we all have to start, with being honest with ourselves, first of all, and then realizing where we come from and trying to heal South Africa as a nation. But as I said earlier, it starts with the self.
That's wonderful to hear. I want to move back to the book. We could talk about South Africa for the rest of the day. The Telegraph labelled the book compelling and ultimately heartbreaking. Honesty. How important was honesty for you when writing this book? You said, some people said you're too honest. Did you ever have any doubt about how it would impact your life after it's published?
I didn't really think of that because I didn't know what to expect. Obviously, one thing that Madiba also said to me over the years is you'll never in your life do anything that will please everybody. So this is the response to the book, exactly tells me that story. Yes, it's very honest, but I think I need to thank my parents. That's the only way I know. And I'm happy that I could be honest because it's like you're opening yourself, and it's part of the process also of dealing with the next part of my life, you know, closing that door behind me. And I could only do that by being honest.
Zelda, thank you for joining us. You're a fantastic ambassador for South Africa, a real icon, I feel, somebody that we can all look up to. Thank you very much for joining us.
Same to you. Thank you very much for having me.
And a fantastic book that you've written really gives us an insight into not just your life with Nelson Mandela, but our lives as South Africans. Thank you.
Thanks, Eben.
On that note, we have to take a short little break. We'll be back right after this.
to Africa. This is South Africa. The president is Mr. Jacob Zuma. South Africa became a republic in 1960 and attained democracy in 1994. The population is more than 50 million people. One of South Africa's major languages is English. Monetary unit, the rand.
Well, hello and welcome back to Newsroom. Let's just take a look at the top stories this morning. A two-day meeting convened by the World Health Organization to discuss potential treatments for Ebola begins in Geneva today. It will discuss the most promising drugs and how to fast-track their testing and production. But the medical charity Doctors Without Borders warns that the meeting will have little impact. The number of Ebola patients who have died of the disease has surged over the past few days. More than 1,900 people have now died after the Ebola epidemic sweeping through West Africa. Democratic Alliance leader Helen Zille will be in Pretoria today for the deadline of the handing over of the so-called spy tapes. Last week, the Supreme Court of Appeal ruled that the National Prosecuting Authority had to comply with the previous order to release the tapes. The recordings were cited as a reason to drop fraud and corruption charges against President Jacob Zuma shortly before he was sworn in as president in 2009. Then in international news, a crucial NATO summit meeting gets underway in Wales today. More than 60 world leaders have arrived for the summit and are expected to face a number of serious threats. The two-day summit will be dominated by the crisis in Ukraine and the threat posed by the Islamic State militants in Iraq and Syria. Now remember, all these top stories are available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Eben, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Katrine. Time now for us to take a look at what's happening on our digital platform, online, and on the social media front. And joining me, as always, every week, digital news production editor, Bongi Mukhale. Good morning, Bongi.
Morning, Eben.
Nice to have you with us again, as always.
Oh, good to be back.
Busy as always, it seems, in your world. People are always getting it together. This week, I think probably one of the key stories that you guys must have dealt with is the resignation of Phansi Tlakula.
Yes.
Tell us about the reaction around that on the web and on our platforms.
Yeah, just as we were getting used to no longer Dr. Paulo Jordan, then we had to get used to no longer Phansi Tlakula at the IEC. Tuesday she resigned. There was lots and lots of comment from this. You remember that her resignation basically goes back to the findings from the public protector, who said that the 2009 leasing of the IEC's headquarters in Centurion constituted improper conduct and maladministration. The electoral court said that this meant that she actually had to be removed from her position. She went to the Crown Court to appeal this, and eventually the Crown Court dismissed her appeal. So it all just came to an end. And Tuesday, the lady just resigned. Social media went wild. People are saying that this is vindicated the public protector. So we put up a story with that gives a little bit of the background to this if you have a look at your screens.
Yeah.
But if you go further down, then you have all of the comments. People are saying that, it comes to an end, 13 years of being at the helm of one of the most respected institutions in the country, but her resignation was long overdue. And that yet another one, the public protector claims another victim. She actually
claims another victim?
Pay back the money.
Oh, that's very hard.
Yeah.
Oh, my
So
word.
it's that sort of thing. You can go and have a look. People have lots to say about this sort of thing.
I followed it online, and
Yeah.
it's actually been scary. Now, tell us about the news that broke at the weekend around the coup.
Yes.
How was it covered and received?
We've had a lot of coverage on this. We've got videos, we've got audio on this. First of all, remember that we just woke up to the news that, okay, now the leadership from Lesotho is now currently in the country, with reports being that the Prime Minister, Tom Thabane, decided he was going to dissolve Parliament so that he wouldn't have to face a vote of no confidence. And there was this attempted coup. Our Foreign Affairs Department had a press conference on Saturday saying that they would not be in a position to support any kind of unconstitutional removal or change of government. And we had an interview with with the security analyst, Helmut Heitman, who said that any instability in Lesotho would have great ramifications for South Africa. You can go and have a listen to this interview that we had with him. We also do have that presser from the South African government saying that they wouldn't tolerate this sort of behavior. The Prime Minister of Lesotho is currently back in Lesotho now, Tom Thabane, and he's got a security contingent from the South African National Defence Force. So we'll have a look and see what happens there. We'll keep tabs on the story. We're constantly updating it. So it's all available there on our platforms.
Quickly, tell us about Ebola. We saw that now it's grossly underestimated. How's digital been tracking developments?
Okay, well, we've been keeping track of all of the death figures. We're also keeping track of the countries that are being affected by this. Earlier on this week, the South African Health Department released the names of the 11 hospitals that have been identified as Ebola quarantine hospitals. So if you have a look at our page, we've got a map there of all of them. If you have a look at your screen, in Johannesburg, I can tell you that is Charlotte Matlage and Steve Biko. Also, it's been identified that OR Tambo is the highest risk point of entry. So this is why I suppose there's 2 hospitals in Johannesburg to deal with this.
Yeah, that's we are ready at least. It says now you always feature new features. Tell us about them, and then next week Nat Nakasa's funeral. Oscar Pistorius. Yes. How are we going to look forward to those?
Okay, well, we've got lots of information on Nat Nakasa. You'll remember that his remains have been repatriated and he'll be reburied next weekend in Durban. So we've got all of the information about that. There's also the memorial lectures that we'll be putting up. So you can go and have a read, get yourself familiar with this great anti-apartheid journalist. So we've got all of that ready and everything. And obviously what we're looking ahead to next week, the big news is Oscar Pistorius. We know that now he's finally going to be receiving his judgment. We don't know how it's going to go. We don't know what deliberations Judge Masipa has been making, but everybody's quite excited about this. So we've got our playlist. We've been keeping track throughout of all proceedings. We've got all kinds of information available on our site and on our YouTube channel. So anyone's welcome to go and have a look.
That's fantastic. It's one of the very best in South Africa, and we always keep you updated. Bongi, thank you for joining us today. As always, you bring such a breath of fresh air to what we do. Yeah, we're trying to connect the digital world with the television world, and you seem to be the glue. Thank you very much, my dear. Thanks for joining us. Let's take a quick look at what you're talking about again on social media now. Vach Kaur says, Department of State warns U.S. citizens to defer travel to Lesotho due to the deterioration of the security situation in Lesotho, in that country, says. Tayung Wesley Kim says, I pray for the people of Lesotho and wish this political unrest shall pass soon. Well, it seems as if matters are back to normal. CS Monitor says, 2 years ago, Lesotho was a democratic success story in Africa, but its attempted coup presents a test. Indeed, it is a test. We are always tested in this life. Now, last month, the body of a 19-year-old sex worker was discovered in a parking lot in Kenilworth. And in Durban, a beheaded body of a sex worker was discovered in a stadium. These are just some of the few cases that fill many sex workers' fears of being victimized here in South Africa. Now, to give us an insight and further the discussion, we're joined by Sex Workers Education and Advocacy Task Force, SWET's Gauteng Provincial Manager, Diane Masawe, and she's joined today by a sex worker who's been victimized by, amongst others, the police. She would like to be known only as Tandiwe today. A very good morning to you, Tandiwe. Thank you for joining us. And also to you, Diane. Thank you once again for coming back. I'd like to start with you, Diane. Are we equipped in South Africa, police and other spheres, to deal with sex work and sex workers?
I think as the police force, they are equipped to deal with sex workers, because what we ask of the police is for them to just execute their duties. And their duties have been clearly stated to them. So whether sex work is criminalized or not, the way they should handle sex workers should be in the same manner that they handle any other person who's committing a crime or any other member of the public when they do engage with them.
But that seems to be not the case. Is that right?
It's not the case. I mean, I think sex work in the country is criminalized, so all aspects of sex work are regarded as a crime. And I think the police and others in society use this as a means to abuse sex workers. If I can just share a few statistics, in 2008, SWET did a study where they spoke to sex workers in Cape Town, and out of those, 37% said, they had experienced violence. That was for the outdoor sector, 20 of the indoor sector. And of those, 12% said that they'd actually been raped by the police. So these are people who are meant to be protecting us, and they're actually raping sex workers. Of those as well, 28% said the police had asked them for sex in exchange for not detaining them. And this is it's a clear violation of the police, and the police actually extending their duties in manners that they shouldn't be doing doing so. I think other statistics to share is also in 2012, Women's Legal Centre also did a study where they spoke to 308 sex workers, and 70% of those said, they had experienced violence at the hands of the police. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So these are sex workers who come to us and sex workers who report. How many other sex workers out there, do the police, abuse and harass constantly and actually get away with it? And because sex work is a crime, sex workers are actually scared to go, to come forward and report because that, one, they have to out themselves as sex workers, but also, there's a punitive, reaction from the police where we have seen sex workers who've challenged the police have then been targeted by the police. And this then just deters people from reporting.
And what are some of the horror stories, some of the really bad stories that you've heard from your members?
With regards to the police?
That and in general.
I think with regards to the police, we had sex workers in Cape Town who got picked up by the police. They were taken to a mortuary. And they were raped by the police, and the police actually showed them a corpse and told them, if you report, that could be you lying on that slab. It's things like that. With regards to clients, women get picked up by clients. They get dropped off 50 kilometers from where they've been picked up. They get dropped off naked. And it's once again, then women have to then navigate the terrains of walking naked in areas when we know already we've got such high rates of sexual violence in the country, regardless of whether one is a sex worker or not.
Before we escalate this conversation to the legalization debate, I would like to speak to Thandi, where it's not her real name, I must tell you, but she is brave enough to come here today. We're not going to show our identity for fear of reprisal, but Thandi, if I can ask you just to tell us your experiences of being a sex worker in South Africa and the dangers that you have to face and the harassment that you have to face almost daily.
Yes, my name is Thandi. I'm a sex worker in South Africa. There was a case whereby a client called us to come into his house. At the end of the day, the clients couldn't pay us, and we had to call the police. Police came into the scene, but at the end of the day, the police they couldn't help us. What they did, they demanded us money. Either we're gonna go to the cell, or either we give them money. So I could say we are actually very, very disappointed when it comes on that. So. Yeah, we're not safe, but at the end of the day, we had just to give them money so that they must not arrest us, because they just tell us that what we're doing was illegal. So, yeah, at the end of the day, we just gave them money.
And tell us, what would you like to happen then? What do you think would make the situation better?
I guess at the end of the day, they might just legalize the sex workers, because at the end of the day, we work as we are normal people, like we earn money for it. So at the end of the day, we feel like we need to be safe, and it needs to be legalized, because we look after our kids for us to earn the money.
At the end of the day, it's mothers of children out there that are doing an honest day's work. It is the oldest profession in the world. Thandi, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to conclude the conversation with Diane here. Diane, just weigh in on the legalization debate. Your organisation, what are your views on this, and what are you guys doing to further this?
I think as an organisation, we support decrim of sex work. Because we feel that under a legalized model, still certain aspects of sex work could be criminalized. I think before we had total criminalization, sex work in South Africa was legalized, where sex workers were the ones who were committing a crime and their clients weren't. But when the Sexual Offences Act got amended in 2007, all aspects of sex work were criminalized. So we support decrim of sex work, where we see sex work will be seen as work, and we see this as the best model to regulate sex workers in the country. Not only, in terms of human rights violations, but also, in terms of health. A study was published and was launched at the AIDS conference in Australia, that showed, when sex work is seen as work and decriminalized, it actually decreases up to 40% of new infections, of HIV new infections. And that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of, what we could do if sex work was seen as work. So some of the violations that Thandi spoke about, of clients not paying, of calling the police for help, because, one would assume, you call the police when you need assistance, and the police actually coming, instead of helping, actually further victimizing somebody who's already been abused, will actually go away. So as an organization, we call for decrim, where sex work is seen as work, and the sex work industry is then regulated by laws, but also by sex workers who are working in the industry, who know how the industry operates.
Well, Diane, thank you very much for joining us. That's Diane Masawe, who's the Gauteng Provincial Manager of the Sex Workers Education and Advocacy Task Force. Thank you once again for joining us and giving us an insight. That's where we wrap it today. Newsroom is broadcast live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. The show repeats at 2 in the afternoon with a rebroadcast at 5 a.m. the following morning, so there's no excuse for you to miss it. We also stream live on YouTube at that time, with the show available on demand on our YouTube channel all of the time. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom. You know we love it in the morning.